Okay, so it's a pleasure to welcome you all for this course on exceptional groups. First of all, I would like to thank Manish for agreeing to give this course. Manish and I go back a very long way. I have known him for more than half of my life, actually. I think we may have joined MRI around the same time. The
Yeah.
only difference was that I was a student and he was a faculty member. But he never felt that we were in a different group. He was perhaps as comfortable with us students, if not more, as he was with his colleagues. As far as his academics goes, he is a student from Mumbai University. He did his PhD at TIFR with Professor Parimala, then spent some time at ICTP, and then he joined HRI. Then it was called MRI, and now he is at ISI Bengaluru. Manish is an excellent mathematician and a very nice dear friend. So he is truly exceptional in many ways. Please start your lectures, Manish.
Oh, thanks, Shripad, for extravagant introduction. I still don't know if I'm an excellent mathematician, but let me take it on face value and proceed. So this course is a little on the elementary side. So maybe some people expect certain things from the course, and that may or may not come true. But anyway, let me begin somewhere. The idea is to introduce certain objects that one may encounter while dealing with exceptional groups. So that is the purpose. As it is, one can never be happy with anything, perhaps. But this is the first course, so let's go with that. So to begin with, let's start with an algebraically closed field, capital K. So I'll take a simplest possible route to defining an algebraic group, linear algebraic group. So suppose I have a subfield small k of capital K. So by a linear algebraic group, I mean a Zariski closed subgroup, capital G, inside GL of V, which is all linear automorphisms of a finite dimensional vector space V over capital K. And we say G is defined over small k if the defining polynomials for G can be chosen to have coefficients over k. So that is the definition. And as I said, this lecture and the next mostly are preliminaries for the material to follow. So let's start with the group defined over K. We will use this convention that mostly when I talk about group theoretic properties for G, say solvability or connectedness or nilpotency, one means that GK bar as an abstract group has those properties. GK bar is a variety, and here I can talk, there is a Zariski topology here, and one can talk of connectedness and so on. So that is the convention. And simplicity is a tricky notion. Here we call G to be a simple algebraic group. I am not putting any adjectives here. If the abstract group GK bar, which has Zariski topology now, has no connected normal subgroups other than the trivial subgroup and itself. So that thing I missed here. So such mistakes are somewhere visible now. I didn't see them when I wrote the notes. So examples are the standard ones. SLN, for example, the subgroup of GLN defined by determinant equal to 1. That's a simple algebraic group. Whereas GLN itself is not, because it has a connected center. And that's certainly not allowed when we talk of simplicity. Here again, connectedness is not needed really. I just put it there for some stupid reason. So we define for an algebraic group G radical of G to be the largest connected normal solvable subgroup, and define G to be semi-simple. So this is just one word here. Define G to be semi-simple if the radical of G is trivial. This is equivalent to saying G has no connected normal abelian subgroups actually. So that may be done in the tutorial session sometime. That's another condition one can include. And then there's this notion of semi-simple and unipotent elements in an algebraic group. So for that, one can fix an embedding to begin with. So I can think of elements of the group as matrices with entries in K bar. And then I can talk of an element as a matrix being semi-simple or unipotent. Semi-simple means it's diagonalizable. Unipotent means G minus identity is nilpotent, or all eigenvalues of G are equal to 1. One can show that these notions really are independent of the fixed embedding. So they are intrinsic to the structure of G. And by definition, G is a unipotent group if all elements of G are unipotent. This is certainly not similar to defining G to be semi-simple. As you would have learned that certainly G is far from being semi-simple if you demand all elements of G are semi-simple. And there is a notion called reductive groups. So here we define first what is called the unipotent radical of the group. That is the largest connected normal unipotent subgroup of G. And that can be shown to be the set of all unipotent elements, which I have denoted by RUG here, inside RG. So remember, RJ is a solvable group. If you collect all unipotents there, that forms a subgroup, and that is RUG. And you call G as reductive if the unipotent radical is trivial. An example of that, so this example will keep coming and we will see many more. So GLN is known to be reductive. You can do this as an exercise, but this is not semi-simple, right? Because we already saw why this is not semi-simple, but it is reductive. And semi-simplicity will mean trivial radical, and that obviously means trivial unipotent radical. So semi-simple implies reductive. These groups that one knows, SON, SP, so this is a conflicting, many times one faces this problem. Perhaps in finite group theory, similar situation comes when you talk of dihedral groups. So this, unfortunately, both notations are used. So SP2N for me here means symplectic group of alternating form, and alternating forms live in even dimensional spaces as long as we're talking about non-degenerate ones. So that 2N is to denote that. Later on we will see this notation again. SLN, these are all actually simple algebraic groups in the sense I defined, and simple means semi-simple as well by the very definition. Next notion is of a torus. So if you studied some little bit of algebraic groups, you would have encountered this group called the multiplicative group, defined over a field K. And that's characterized by what it does to field extensions of K. So if you think of it as a functor of points, then, so as a variety, you can think of varieties on occasions as functors of points, as long as affine varieties are concerned. Then as a functor of points, it takes a field extension and gives you the group of invertible elements in that extension. So that is the functor here we are talking about. And you define an algebraic group T to be a torus over K, or torus defined over K, if when you base change all the way to the separable closure, actually you don't have to go all the way to the separable closure, but over some extension, if you like, it becomes isomorphic to the direct product of some copies of Gn. So such a thing is called a torus defined over K. A typical example one gives is of a separable quadratic extension, and look at the norm one elements there. So that is defined by this equation. So it's an algebraic group, and one can see in the exercise session. In fact, here I can remove this quadratic condition. I just take a separable field extension of some degree and take the same equation and look at the norm one elements, the variety of norm one elements there. That's an algebraic group, and that can be shown So in this case, if I take a quadratic extension, then the norm on elements will give me a one-dimensional variety. So this is a nice exercise that this variety, this torus is not isomorphic to GM over K. But if you base change to in fact capital K, you will see this is isomorphic to GM. So there are examples of tori which are not, these kind of tori are called split. So that's the next definition. We call a torus defined over K to be K split if over K I can find an isomorphism of T with a product of GMs. An example is the maximal torus, the torus of largest dimension, the one along the set of all diagonal matrices in SLN. That's clearly a torus, and that's largest possible inside SLN. So that is an example of a K-split torus. And we already saw an example of a non-K-split torus. And any algebraic group, in fact, this connectedness is not really needed here. Any algebraic group admits tori always. We allow the trivial subgroup to be a torus of dimension 0. So there are maximal tori always. They may be trivial. For example, unipotent groups do not have any tori, non-trivial tori, I mean. And when the group is connected, one can show that any two tori of largest possible dimension are actually conjugate in G. And therefore, you get a number associated to a connected algebraic group. Namely, you fix any maximal torus, look at its dimension. That number is called the rank of G. So we will use this terminology later. I will again define it when I come to that. The next notion is of the Lie algebra of an algebraic group. I'm sorry, all this may be known to various people here, but I'm somehow assuming that there are students who have not seen these things before, so hopefully this will be useful to them. So if you studied Lie groups, there one looks at, there also one has this notion of Lie algebra, and that is the set of all vector fields on the group which are translation invariant, smooth vector fields which are translation invariant. And by the very definition, since we are looking at translation invariant fields, it's enough to see what they do at the identity element, because, and that means it will just give you a single tangent vector at identity. And if you translate that around, you get back the vector field. And conversely, any vector field which is translation invariant gives you a tangent vector at identity. So, and then bracket of vector fields, there is a Lie bracket there. So that's a Lie algebra, gives you a Lie algebra structure on the tangent space at identity via this bijection I mentioned. You can also think of vector fields as derivations on the algebra of smooth functions. And that again is a Lie algebra, and you can talk of the Lie bracket being if delta 1, delta 2 are two derivations, then you take delta 1, delta 2 minus delta 2, delta 1. That is the Lie bracket there. So the same situation can be generalized as in Lie theory to algebraic group theory. Here you look at, so algebra of functions is the coordinate ring here, and then you can talk of derivations on that algebra, the coordinate ring of G. I have not written all that down here, but you can see any standard book. So this Lie algebra is the definition. So left invariant derivations on the coordinate ring of G is the definition of the Lie algebra of G. That has a natural identification with the tangent space at identity. So really enough to just give you one tangent vector to talk of derivation. So you can think of tangent vectors as derivations. Think about it. We will discuss all this in tutorials if needed. So that is the notion here. Right. So if you fix a maximal torus T in a connected algebraic group G, well, this definition doesn't again need connectedness. You can define the group of characters on T, namely all algebraic group morphisms from T to Gm. So when I write this, I am looking at all these objects over the algebraic closure. So that's a group. It's called a group of characters of T. Next idea is you look at the action of G on itself via inner automations by elements of G. And this, if you fix an element on G and look at the inner automorphism given on G, so G to G, you have the inner automorphism. If you differentiate it, you get an automorphism of the Lie algebra. So we get, therefore, an action of the group on the Lie algebra via that automorphism I described. So this gives me an action of the group on the Lie algebra. That's called the adjoint action. And T, therefore, also acts on G via this adjoint action. Just restrict. So namely, take an element of T, look at the inner conjugation of T on capital G, differentiate it to get an automorphism of G. That is called capital add of small t. So that automorphism acts on G, of course. So that's the action. So to give an example, which is pretty standard here. So if you look at the standard group GLN or SLN we have seen just now, and T, let's fix T to be the diagonal maximal torus. It's much easier to handle that right now. Then the adjoint action on the Lie algebra. So what is the Lie algebra? Lie algebra here is the algebra of all n by n matrices with the bracket of AB, two matrices A and B, the bracket is AB minus BA. SLN, the Lie algebra, is all trace zero matrices with the same Lie bracket as here. It's a sub-algebra here. And the adjoint action in this case is just conjugation by the element T. So T acts on X by T X T inverse. Well, here I can forget T, I can write capital G actually. So the adjoint action of the group on the Lie algebra is by just conjugating elements of the Lie algebra. And this holds for not just these two examples, any closed subgroup of GLN has this property. So let's look at, so these are the typical examples that one encounters, SLN or SP2N, SON and so on. These are what are called classical groups. These already come with an embedding inside some GLN. And there the adjoint action is easily described as I described just now by conjugation. Now, when I am dealing with a split maximal torus, so I am more separable closure or algebraic closure, there the torus is already split and I look at the adjoint action. So I can decompose this vector space into eigenspaces for the action of the torus. Because it's commuting family of semisimple elements, I can simultaneously diagonalize them, which just means I can find a basis of common eigenvectors for all elements of T. So that allows me to decompose G as direct sum of, so I should have written G alphas here. So what is this V alpha? So V alpha in this stupid notation here means set of all vectors on V on which any torus element acts as, so suppose I call a typical vector here as small v and a typical element here as small t, then T acted on V is alpha applied to T times V. So these are eigen characters, so to say. So those eigen characters which are non-trivial here, they are called roots of the group. So by definition, I am looking at non-trivial ones which occur here. Those are called the roots of G with respect to T. There are some properties those characters satisfy, which I am skipping right now. They together are called root systems. So there is a beautiful theory of root systems, which unfortunately I am not going into. So let me compute this example, not really completely, but give an example of what's going on.
Hey,
So,
Manish,
yeah.
what do you mean by non-trivial eigencharacter?
No, so I mean the trivial one corresponds to the torus because torus acts on
Zero.
yeah. So
Triviality is zero.
I have not written that down here. So fixed points of the torus will correspond to the center, the torus itself, right?
Torus.
Yeah. So I hope I have written correctly here. Yeah, I took it taken reductive here. So that is that corresponds to the trivial one. Yeah. So
Yeah, okay.
so for example, if I take the group GLN and T to be the diagonal torus, then the action of this, as I said, is by conjugation on any element of G. So this G decomposes, this G is nothing but all matrices, n by n matrices. So you can see easily that I can write any n by n matrix as a diagonal matrix plus those matrices which have just one entry at a non-diagonal position. Okay, so pick any ij, I not equal to j. I equal to j are taken care of here. When I is not equal to j, then I have one entry at each position. Collect all such matrices for fixed I and j that I am calling as Gij, and you can check that precisely these Gijs are those elements of the matrix algebra such that if I conjugate it by an element diagonal matrix like this, then I get Ti times Tj inverse times x. So a character of the torus T for every I between 1 and n can be written down. So I call that as alpha I. So what does alpha I do? Alpha I applied to T1, T2, Tn gives me Ti, the ith entry of this matrix. So this is exactly alpha I. So where is that? I have somewhere. Okay. So alpha I, alpha j inverse really. That is the character that occurs here. And that I am calling as alpha ij. So alpha ij of T1, T2, Tn is Ti, Tj inverse. So this is the eigen character that is. So as an eigen character, alpha ij is alpha I times alpha j inverse. That is the character we get. And those are the roots. So let me pause here for questions. Any questions so far?
Sir, you have used a word earlier, variety. So here variety means you are taking irreducible closed subset in Zariski topology, na?
Not necessarily. I didn't say irreducible. So variety for me always means common zeros of some bunch of polynomials. If it's irreducible, then it's irreducible. Otherwise, it has some finitely many components. So mostly we will be dealing with algebraic groups and connected ones among those. So they will be certainly irreducible varieties. So yeah, some books define variety to be irreducible, but we should not actually, because in general algebraic group has connected components. And they are important to deal with. So one should include even disconnected varieties in the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
So it boils down to just at least affine varieties. You just look at the coordinate ring. It may or may not be an integral domain. So we allow non-integral domains also in the discussion. Somewhere I have written connected groups. I have made some noise at those places where those hypotheses are not really needed. But when we are talking about roots and so on, I fixed here connected reductive somewhere. Yeah. So the reason for that is I fixed a maximal torus. Remember, and when the group is connected, all these kind of tori are conjugates by elements of G. So whatever decomposition I am getting here with respect to capital T is in fact most of the geometric properties, all the geometric properties you get here for this set of characters of T will be replicated to any other maximal torus you work with. So that's the reason for taking connected here. Yeah, so any question?
No, thank you, sir.
Yeah, so here is the example for GLN. The roots for GLN are precisely these characters, alpha ij for I not equal to j. Remember, I am throwing away the trivial character. So alpha ij, which is by definition acting on T1, T2, Tn is Ti, Tj inverse. And going by this decomposition, you see here in this example, G has broken up into direct sum of, this is the Lie algebra of the torus actually. So its dimension is same as dimension of T, which is really rank of G. And then I have these in practice, you will see these are all one-dimensional spaces. This is a finite set again, because this is finite dimensional after all. So counting gives you here this important relation, rank of G, I mean dimension of G is same as rank of G plus cardinality of the set of roots. This is some equation that I will need later. So if you know two of these quantities, you can determine the third one. That's the idea. Okay, so there is a notion of irreducible root system. So I have not defined a root system here. This can be defined as a finite set of vectors in a Euclidean space, which has some nice symmetric properties. And the root system that we get for a simple algebraic group turns out to be irreducible. Irreducible means you cannot write it as union of two root systems. Okay, so let me just pass it here, and if possible, we will take it up if people want later. Then there is a notion of positive roots. So start with phi gt that we started with. Then you can prove that you can find a subset of, so this is like putting an order on this set. So you can declare certain roots to be positive. So there is such a choice available to you. And negative roots of the whole set decomposes as phi plus, disjoint union with minus phi plus. And these are called negative roots. And then the property of these roots is that if I have a integral combination equal to 0 with coefficients non-negative, then each one of them must be 0. Once you have this, you can prove that there exists a unique, so once you fix, so there is no uniqueness about phi plus, because for example, this set can be treated as a different phi plus, right? Because its negative is this. So there's no uniqueness really for this. But once you fix positive roots, then there is a unique subset contained in the positive roots, such that the elements there are linearly independent. And any root can be written as a combination of elements from delta with coefficients integers, and either all integers are positive or all are negative. So those are the properties of this delta. This is called basis for, once you have fixed phi plus, there is a unique such thing, it's called the basis. Okay, by linear independence, I mean when you look at it, this particular Euclidean space. One example here again of, sorry about this. Yeah, so I remember I told you what this character alpha I is. It just picks the ith entry of a given torus element in GLN, of course. Then you look at these particular characters, alpha I plus 1 inverse, where I goes from 1 to n. So these constitute a basis for this root system. Okay. So this is needed later. So I just wanted to quickly do this. So this follows from what I said just now. If you look at the cardinality of a basis, that is same as rank of the torus or dimension of the torus, and that is called rank of G. And we can define a graph, construct a graph from this data. Once you fix a basis, you know, if you fix a basis, then you can recover phi plus from this. by what I said. And once you have a 5 plus, you can construct a basis and so on. So these are in a sort of way bijective correspondence. So here we define a graph by taking,
Manish,
yeah.
so that just scroll up a little, that delta. Yeah, so I think here you want to make a distinction between semi-simple and reductive. Otherwise, so take
Yes, you're right.
take GLN.
Yeah, didn't I say this somewhere? No. Yeah, you're right. I should have said.
Oh, you're taking a simple algebraic group. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm sticking to simple ones for these ideas, or semi-simple is fine.
Although the example had GLN in it, so
Yeah, you're right. But here, that was well, the example is correct.
you just change it to SLN.
But yeah, you're right. Yeah. So sorry about that. Yeah. Right. So to make this graph, you just take elements of delta as vertices, and you join two elements. Say alpha and beta are two elements. Then you look at. So there is a definition of this angular bracket. So if round bracket denotes the Euclidean inner product on this set of characters I defined. So let's fix a Euclidean inner product there, which is positive definite. Then in terms of that, we can define this angular bracket, which is not a symmetric form. You define VW to be 2 times round VW divided by length of W. Obviously, this is not symmetric. And essentially, the angle between two roots decides how many bonds you join them by. So this is the recipe. You take this number, multiply by the other number, those many bonds. And then there is a direction you should put. The direction goes from the bigger root to the smaller root. That is the idea. Okay, so let me show you those pictures you get. These are, I had listed these as prerequisites really, but I am doing these to make sure some people are not lost.
Manish, how do you say something is smaller and something is bigger?
So this is the notion of, so you can talk about root lengths. So I'm not going into that. And then you just end up having two root lengths actually. So you can talk of root lengths and the bigger root and the small, but this is the recipe here. I forget about lengths. Then you say that direction goes from alpha to beta if this condition holds, and goes from beta to alpha if this condition holds. So, you just have to divide this by something and to get the length basically. So this is the recipe. These are negative numbers. So their product is positive. Yeah, is it okay?
No, maybe not yet. Is there an overkill here? I mean, what is your beta check, alpha check?
I have defined, I forgot to define those, yeah.
Maybe it should be angular bracket alpha beta times angular bracket beta alpha.
Angular bracket, I don't know. Okay, so let me leave it at the moment. I thought there should be a check here. Well, let's discuss this later.
Okay.
So I request Shripad to.
This is fine actually. This alpha beta check meaning 2 alpha beta by beta beta. That's it.
That's right. But that's the meaning of the angular bracket alpha beta.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a dual, this check I should have defined. You're right. I goofed up there. But please take it up, Shripad. We must fix this.
We will take it up in the tutorials.
Yeah. We should fix this. This is something we can explain completely, right? I somehow, I don't know. I should have explained this. But yeah, so let's forgive me for that. Goof up and proceed. So then you get certain graphs. And those graphs are the following. So these are labeled as AN, BN, CN, and DN. And this AN has N. So these N's are all number of nodes or rank of that diagram or the group delta, cardinality of delta, I mean. So here, this corresponds to SL n plus 1. This diagram corresponds to SO2n plus 1. I'll say in a minute these restrictions. So here again I have written SPN. So personally I prefer to say N, but anyway. And then you have SO2n here. So these restrictions are because when you go lower than that, those numbers, there are some coincidences. And among these groups, SLN plus 1 and SPN are simply connected, whereas these orthogonal, special orthogonal groups are not. Their simply connected versions are called spin groups of those indices. So we will need the notion of spin group at some stage. I may not go into the details of that, but it is the simply connected cover of these groups. So these families are sometimes these groups which each one belongs to an infinite family indexed by positive integers. These are called classical groups. I'll come back to this a little later. Other than those, there are 5 individual diagrams. So remember, these are all infinitely many. For each n, I have one diagram an. So this each one is an infinite family here. But other than that, there are just 5 more diagrams to look at. And these are called E6. So these are 6 nodes, E7, E8, F4, and G2. So there are some unequal root lengths here. And here I have done the computation of dimensions. So of course, you need to know how many roots are there, and that's a pretty well studied object. One can find those roots, number of roots, and so on using combinatorics. Then here, E6 type root system, I didn't write anything for the classical groups because mostly one knows lots of things about classical groups, and my course is not focusing on those. If I need something, I will do that work there. But for the exceptionals, here the root system has 72 elements, then the dimension of E6 is 78. Here you get dimension as 133. Here you get 248, 52, and 14. So these are the 5 exceptionals. Personally, there is one more I would like to include in this list, and that is called the triality form of D4. So remember, Dn has this diagram. So if n is bigger than equal to, so n less than 4, as I said, the diagram will become straight line actually. So it will coincide with some an and so on. So we look at n bigger than 4, then the diagram has only one symmetry, order 2 symmetry. Whereas when n is 4, you see many more symmetries. The full group of symmetries here is the permutation group on 3 symbols. So S3, so that has order 6. So that is one reason why this group sometimes is considered as exceptional. And its dimension is 28. So we will encounter this group. If I have time, I'll say about something about classification of such groups. Okay, so there is this notion of adjoint semisimple groups. So these are semisimple groups without a center. They don't have center. Then there is notion of Chevalier group. Here, one starts with a complex simple Lie algebra. Then there is a recipe to construct these groups. These are called Chevalier groups, and they correspond to split simple adjoint groups over K. By split, I mean maximal torus. I can find a maximal torus which is split over K. So which is isomorphic to some product of GMs. So this is what for me, actually I will also abuse language sometimes and identify Chevalier group with this algebraic group. You see, Chevalier groups are actually abstract groups, but here I want to think of them as algebraic groups sometimes. So this is the idea. Now, one knows that you can write, you can obtain any semisimple actually group as a central extension of an adjoint group. So there is a short exact sequence. where the end point is an adjoint group, the middle point is the group I'm talking about, and the leftmost one is a simply connected group actually. Well, yeah. So I want to talk about this a little bit. So that kind of discussion reduces looking at general semi-simple groups over K and their classification to classifying adjoint connected groups over K. And there is some technical detail required there called Weyl restriction, which I will forget for the moment. So the point is that we should look at classifying connected adjoint groups, connected adjoint simple groups. Now going back to Weyl again, as long as the classical types are, yeah?
So, sir, previous discussion was based on algebraically closed field, right? Now onwards, you are
Yeah. Now I am dealing with because yeah, here the field need not be algebraically closed, so this is more general.
And sir, one more thing. So, you said something about D4, some speciality. Could you rephrase it again? What did you just say? I just missed that part.
No, this is nothing serious. Just compare this diagram. This is the diagram for D4. And consider this diagram for n bigger than equal to 5. So this diagram has only one symmetry, namely Z mod 2, whereas here there are more symmetries. So this stands out from other DNs, and this is the reason sometimes this is treated, well, there are many other reasons, but sometimes this is included in the list of exceptional groups. So yeah.
Manish, can you repeat something about Chevalier group? Like, they are algebraic groups, right? Just that the torus splits over K?
Yeah. For me, they are algebraic groups, but for group theorists, finite group theorists, they treat it as an abstract group. So that's why I made some noise about, I don't know where it went.
So the definition is that their torus splits over K. Is that what?
Yeah. There is a maximal torus which is split over K.
That's all is the definition. It's a semi-simple group, right?
I'm interested in simple group. So
simple.
So Chevalier groups are constructed from simple Lie algebras over complex numbers.
Okay.
Semi-simple groups are also, I think, captured by the construction.
Yeah. But I am interested in simple ones, right? So for me, these two concepts are same. Okay, so let me just repeat. As soon as I go ahead, you will see what I mean. I hope I answered. Somebody else asked me some question. I hope I answered that. If not, please ask me again. Yeah. So basically, classifying simple or semi-simple groups over a field which may not be algebraically closed can be reduced to studying or classifying connected adjoint groups over K. Yeah, so I was talking about Weyl in that context. So Weyl did that classification for classical groups, and that can be done in terms of algebras, associative algebras with involutions. So which I'm not going into. Involutions can be either orthogonal involutions or unitary involutions. Depending on the involution, you get all the classical groups. So I will refrain from going into more details, but this is pretty well understood theory. So I will go ahead now. So one is interested in what are called twisted forms or just forms of Chevalier groups. So I will talk about this now. So if C is a Chevalier group over K, for me, as I said, it means split adjoint simple group over K. Another algebraic group G over K, we call it a K form of this group C. If when I base change to the separable closure, I get isomorphism with C. So over the separable closure, those two groups become isomorphic. But over the ground field, they may not be isomorphic. I should have given examples here. One can take example as just look at real numbers and look at the quaternion division algebra there. In that, I can look at norm 1 elements and go modulo the center. So that will be one group, that will be my G. And then the other group is PSL2. So the first group I defined, namely the norm 1 elements in the quaternion division algebra modulo the center, as an algebraic group, remember. So that is one group, and the other group is PSL2. These groups are not isomorphic over R, but over C they are isomorphic. So that is a twisted form of PSL2. I should have written that down, but anyway, we will see more examples. So let's look at, so fix a separable closure and look at the Galois group of separable closure over K and fix an isomorphism of G with C. So of course, this isomorphism is defined over Ks to begin with. Then for any Galois element tau, I can write a diagram like this. So here the Ks points of G, they are isomorphic. So when I say G is isomorphic to C, I mean the group of Ks points. This is just an abstract group isomorphism. GKS isomorphic to CKS. And then I have so I have this diagram. And this diagram commutes if and only phi is defined over K. So this is just Galois theory. There's no big deal here. So phi is defined over K if and only if this diagram commutes. In other words, if I look at the commutator of sigma and phi, so this is the commutator, let's call that as A sub sigma. So sigma is a Galois element. This is an automorphism of the Ks points of C. And this is really the obstruction. So this for the set A sigma, where sigma varies in gamma, is giving me the obstruction for phi, in this case phi, to be defined over K. So if this obstruction vanishes, meaning all elements like this become trivial, then phi is defined over K. Otherwise, phi is not defined over K. So this definition of A sigma tells us this simple relation: A sigma tau is A sigma times sigma acted on A tau. So this is a simple check. Remember, this is the definition. So this is a simple checking. So this brings me to my...
So is this Galois group finite? Or?
No. This is separable closure.
Oh, okay. Yes,
K need not, even for finite, when K is a finite field, it is never finite actually.
Okay.
Unless K is equal to Ks.
Oh.
Well, I'm sorry, no, this is need not be finite. I should be careful, yeah. Okay, so any other questions? I will change my slides. So these notes are over. So let me share. So can someone tell me how to unshare this now?
No, you don't have to unshare. You just see the other slides.
So is this visible now?
Yes.
Wonderful. This is much better than Zoom, I feel. Yeah, so this brings us to the definition of what are called Galois cocycles. So suppose as Shripad said, I should have called it G here, but I am calling it B. Suppose B is an algebraic group over K. Then a map from the Galois group to B, the Ks points of B, which I will denote as A goes to, well, this is a mistake. Sigma goes to A sigma, should have been written here. So this is called a Galois cocycle if it satisfies the condition in the last condition in the previous notes. So that is the definition. That condition defines a Galois 1 cocycle. And traditionally one writes this sigma applied to X as sigma on the left side of X like this. So you will see this very irritating, but group theorists like this.
I think Anirban has raised a hand. Anirban, he
Sorry, maybe I don't understand this definition of A sigma. So A sigma should lie in BKS according to this notation, or?
Yeah.
And it was defined as
no, again, sorry, there's a mistake here. It should be
BK.
automorphisms of BK.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Yeah, there's too many mistakes. Yeah, this
No,
should
no,
be
yeah,
odd of BKS.
Okay.
Please correct that. Yeah.
No, this can be okay if you take your B to be odd C.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
previous group was C.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it looks
yeah.
okay to me because later you have a B in capital B and you are defining equivalence of one cocycles. I think
Oh,
it
yeah. You better think of B as odd C. You're right. But right now, I'm not. By the way, sorry, Anirban, I'm correct here. Huh? Let me correct myself again. I'm correct here. In the sense, I'm defining a cocycle here. Just what is a cocycle? It's a map sigma goes to A sigma, which satisfies the condition.
Okay. I see.
So
It's just
there is no
location.
problem. Yeah, this is fine. This is fine. No problem. Just the mistake is sigma goes to A sigma should be corrected.
Okay.
Yeah, this is fine.
Okay. Thanks.
So we'll come back to that setup later. So remember that condition I have not repeated, but last notes that condition should be satisfied. So this box was the label of that condition. So we declare two cocycles. So remember, this is indexed by sigma here. Two cocycles A sigma and A prime sigma to be which have values in B Ks really to be equivalent. If you can find an element B here such that A prime sigma is B inverse A sigma, sigma applied to B. So this is the notion of equivalence of two one cocycles. And of course, if a cocycle is equivalent to the trivial cocycle, then it is going to look like this. And these guys are called co-boundaries. And if two cocycles differ by a co-boundary, then you get something equivalent. So declare that as your equivalence relation. So the definition of the first cohomology set gamma with coefficients in BKS is defined to be the set of equivalence class of one cocycles, and the equivalence is defined here. This is a pointed set, so there is a distinguished point here, namely the trivial cocycle, class of the trivial cocycle, which essentially is what we call co-boundaries. Okay, so one application of this, and we will see more. This is a group, by the way, when B is abelian. So this is no big deal. You can see that yourself. So we will see soon some examples and applications. So now we will talk about what are called twisted objects or twisted forms or forms of objects defined over K. So whatever we did in the case of Chevalier groups, it just generalizes as it is. We don't have to do any extra work. So this really is an exercise. So let's take X to be an object defined over K. By an object, I obviously don't mean an arbitrary category and arbitrary object. I am interested in objects like varieties or groups and algebras, modules, etc., etc. So I'm not listing all of them here. So I'm a little vague here, but you can look up Sayre's book on Galois cohomology. So you say an object defined over K. So you fix an extension. Let's fix a Galois extension really of small k. So if X is an object over K, we call an object defined over K as a capital K over small k form of X. I don't need Galois to define this, but anyway, if after base changing to capital K, Y becomes isomorphic to X. So this isomorphism is defined over capital K, okay? The set of K isomorphism classes of such Y's is denoted by E of K over K comma X. So that means all isomorphism classes of all objects Y which become isomorphic to X over capital K. So fairly straightforward and simple definition. So far I have not used Galois of K over K. But now let's put it, demand that to be Galois. Then I have a group here. So here I'm not saying infinite or finite, any Galois extension. So then there is a natural action on automorphism group of K automorphism group of X. Always there is an action, natural action. And so we can talk of one cocycles with values in this group as I did. And most often you will, so if this is a reasonable object, then OT X is an algebraic group, which may be a tricky thing, by the way. So I'm just assuming here that we don't really need an algebraic group to define Galois cocycles, right? We just need a group. If you notice here, we don't need an algebraic group. We just need a group on which the Galois acts. So there is no need to worry about if X is a variety, is OT X an algebraic group or not. All those questions are deep questions and I'm not really dealing with those, just to clarify. So here is a principle that you can find a bijective correspondence of the set of isomorphism classes of twisted forms of X living over small k with this cohomology set. So we will see a sketch of proof of this later, but let me give some examples before we. So any questions so far? Okay, so if there are, please interrupt me at your will. I will stop and answer. So some important objects that we consider are what are called tensors. So for that we fix a finite dimensional vector space. And by a tensor of type PQ, we mean just an element of V tensor power P tensored with V star is the dual, tensored power Q. So any element here is called a tensor of type PQ. And you can obviously define when two such tensors are isomorphic. So it's a simple definition, so I'll skip it. We can talk of, therefore, we can define base change of a tensor in an obvious way. So X sub K means X tensor 1. So base change makes sense. And as I said before, as I defined before, you can therefore talk of K over K forms of V comma X. And E K over K for a fixed tensor therefore can be defined. And then you have this cohomology set, Galois K over K with coefficients in odd K V comma X. And it classifies all those objects over small k which become isomorphic to this tensor over capital K. Examples of even of the example I gave just now. So tensors are important. So quadratic forms can be fit in through that setup. If I have a non-degenerate symmetric bilinear form on a vector space, then it's an element of actually symmetric 2 power, but I'll just treat it right now. I should have actually included a last example also here itself. So I can think of X as a tensor V star, tensor V star. So whatever type I wrote there, 0, 2 or whatever. And then automorphisms of this tensor, you will work out the definition is nothing but the orthogonal group of the quadratic form. And then, so by what we did, what I sketched, the principle says therefore, H1 of K over K with coefficients in the orthogonal group classifies those quadratic forms over K which are K isomorphic to X. Remember, I avoided characteristic 2 here. So dealing with symmetric forms is same as dealing with quadratic forms. Yet another important example that we will really need is this example. So really an algebra for me means a vector space with a bilinear form from A cross A, bilinear map from A cross A to A, bilinear with respect to the field. So let's deal with finite dimensional K algebras. So it's a finite dimensional vector space over K, which has just a bilinear map. Sometimes one just calls this a non-associative algebra because I'm not demanding any associativity condition. And if you want identity, then you have to define that separately. So now we know there is a natural isomorphism between K linear maps from V to W to V star tensor W. Applying that to V equal to A cross, so giving a bilinear map from A cross A to A is same thing as giving a linear map from A tensor A to A. So that's an element of home A tensor A to A. Therefore, it's an element of A tensor A dual tensor A, going by this formula, and that is A star tensor A. So therefore, giving an algebra product on the vector space A is equivalent to giving a tensor here. Okay. And what is an automorphism of A? So you say F in GL, A is an automorphism if it preserves the product. So in this, so remember, I have not said anything about identity. If there is an identity, you want it to be fixed also. But in this case, we say F is an automorphism if it preserves the product. That means it will fix the tensor corresponding to the product here. So it stabilizes, or it belongs to the isotropic group of this tensor. So that is the notion of algebra automorphism. And therefore, so this odd Ka is just automorphisms of A comma that tensor X. So we have this cohomology set. This is in bijection with K isomorphism classes of algebras, which become isomorphic to A over K. So too many K's there, but it's clear what I mean. And this example, as I said, should have come in the first example. If I take my tensor to be skew symmetric tensor, so that corresponds to alternating forms. So the automorphisms is the symplectic group corresponding to that dimension. And we know there is only one non-degenerate symplectic form in a given dimension. So this cohomology set therefore is 0. So this is how sometimes you can compute these sets, and that helps us. So sometimes this set is a group, and in general this set fits inside an exact sequence, as Shripad, I think in his lectures, had sketched it or mentioned it. So I will not really need that sequence, so I didn't mention it, but one can revise that later if necessary. I hope so far. By the same token, I could have written here H1 of GLN also is trivial, because for a fixed dimension, all the vector spaces are isomorphic. So that also vanishes, and so on. So you can write down lots of such groups, sets.
So Manish, so in your example 3 and what you just said about GLN, I guess there is a similar confusion as before of your B versus C.
Just a minute.
No, don't go elsewhere. So here only. So if you were to say that there is only one non-degenerate alternating form on an even dimensional vector space, technically that would correspond to H1 of this Galois cohomology with coefficients in ought of SP.
Yeah, so
and there is some distinction.
No, I understand the confusion. So the clarification I made is, so the only thing here, I defined this cocycle business for any algebraic group. So the only objection, so here, right, I said B is an algebraic group there. So the thing I had to say here is automorphisms of a tensor is an algebraic group. So then what I'm saying makes sense. So automorphisms of a tensor is indeed an algebraic group, because
No, that's not my point. Okay, you can continue making that point for the sake of others. That a symplectic group has no non-trivial little k forms would, by the definitions, correspond to H1 k over k comma ought SP.
Correct. No. SP is the automorphisms of itself.
Yeah. So you have to, and now if you make that thing for GLN, I'm kind of a little confused myself.
I was talking about symplectic forms, no? SP being ought of symplectic form, and that there is only one symplectic form.
Okay.
Means that H1 of SP is trivial.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So that SP is that ought of little x if x corresponds to that.
Right. Yeah. So I think I take your point. I am a little careless about saying things here sometimes. But please, those objections are being raised. Shripad, please make note of these points, because indeed things are a little confusing here. So the only thing I wanted to mention here is if you take a tensor of a given type, then automorphisms of that V comma X, that is a closed subgroup of some GLV, right? Of that GLV. So it's an algebraic group. So that much is being used here.
Okay.
So,
thanks.
okay.
You know, to just give an analogy, H1 of SO or O need not be trivial.
Yeah.
And that will correspond to having many possible quadratic forms which are the same over an algebraic closure.
Yes.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, so the problem is of writing down lots of examples which I haven't, but we will do that in tutorials. So already tutorial session may fall short of time for doing so many things. Okay, so let me go one step further. Let's take A to be the matrix algebra. So this is really very useful. As I said, classical groups are classified in terms of algebras with involutions. So beginning of that is right here. One calls K over K forms of M and K as central simple algebras. So these are algebras, by definition, those algebras living over K, which become isomorphic to the matrix algebra over capital K, right? That is the twisted forms I'm talking about. And their dimensions will therefore be n squared. So one can show that these algebras, there's nothing to show really. Center of this is small k, then base changing center will remain that. So the center of such algebras is actually equal to small k, and these have no two-sided ideals other than the trivial and the full algebra. So these are called central simple algebras. And then there is a theorem in the subject called the Noether. Actually, I should have written it before. Noether-Skolem theorem, but I am used to calling it Skolem-Noether theorem for some reason. That says that every algebra automorphism of a matrix algebra is actually inner conjugation by some matrix. And that tells me that K automorphism of M and K is actually the group PGLNK. Okay? And that therefore tells me, with maybe some checkings here, H1 of PGLN is in bijection with isomorphism classes of central simple algebras over K. Actually, there is a class of varieties also who have automorphism group coinciding with PGLN, namely projective spaces. So, but I may come to that later. Right now, I don't need it, so let me not bother about that. I hope, so these central simple algebras, we will come back later. So I'll skip it right now. This much is fine. Coming back to algebraic groups, I have not yet, I didn't put my efforts here to put it in the version of tensors and so on, but whatever we started with was, I am going back to that. So let's fix a Chevalier group over K. By what I said, there is a bijective correspondence between isomorphism classes of K forms of a Chevalier group over K and H1 of the Galois group with coefficients in odd C. So we already discussed how to write down a cocycle starting from a isomorphism class of a twisted form. So remember, I fixed an isomorphism Y with X over the separable closure. That gave me a cocycle. And let's go the other way around. So I'm not checking bijectivity, I'm just giving you the surjectivity proof. So it's only a sketch. Little bit is left, you can read up or we can discuss whatever. So first, this is really important. So surjectivity means if I give you a cocycle here, I should construct a twisted form living over small k corresponding to C. So how is that done? First, you look at the coordinate ring of C over Ks. That is just, so C is defined over K, remember. That means the coordinate ring has a structure over K, namely it's the base change of the coordinate ring of C tensored with Ks. So there is a Galois action here, namely Galois acts on this place. And the fixed points are Kc. I mean, that corresponds to C, right? But what we want is a new group now, G over small k, such that when I go to separable closure, it becomes isomorphic to C. So what we will do is we will define a new Galois action now on this object. How is that done? So take a Galois element. So you have the Galois action, so that acts as an automorphism of abstract groups, where the Galois acts on this place. So this map is, I am calling as sigma itself. And then I have the cocycle A sigma, which is really an automorphism of K separable C. Because what do I mean by that? Automorphisms of C can, there is an SM, I'm bypassing something here. These are in bijection with automorphisms of the coordinate ring of C. So that bijection is in play here. So I'm taking A sigma as that automorphism, okay? So you can think of A sigma as an automorphism of KS, the coordinate ring of C over separable closure, which is just this. And you take the composite. So A sigma composite sigma. So let's call that as sigma tilde. So this is the new, this sigma tilde is an automorphism of KSC that corresponds to an automorphism of C that I am calling as sigma tilde. And this is the action now. This gives a new action of Galois on KSC. So again, what does that new action mean? Sigma acted on some element here is the action of sigma tilde, which is A sigma composed with sigma. So we are twisting that action by the cocycle. And what we do now is take the fixed points of, so that new action I am denoting by sigma tilde, gamma tilde. I am taking the fixed points of this new action in the full coordinate ring. That will give me K algebra, which has the right properties of being coordinate ring of a certain algebraic group. That algebraic group is uniquely determined, and that we will call as G. And then you can check that because it's a structure on KS. So this fixed points, when you base change to KS, will give you KSC again because of Galois descent. And that G has all the properties we want. So G, when we base change to K, gives you C over KS. So this is how you construct twisted forms of algebraic groups. More or less, this is all I wanted to say. So please, now for the day lecture is over, but I goofed up in many places perhaps. So please ask questions and doubts, whatever.
So Munir, in the last place, what is the sigma tilde fixed?
This is the definition of, I'm just calling this composite as sigma tilde.
Yes.
And this gamma tilde just means old gamma, but with the new action.
So with the new action. Okay.
This is the same group as gamma, but the action on KSC is via these tildes.
Okay.
And I am looking at fixed points of that action here. So that will give me an affine algebra over K, which is a half algebra and so on. So it gives me an algebraic group over K. And that group is the group we want, because when we base change to KS, we get back that.
Thanks.
Yeah. So actually speaking, we can, if you see book of Kneser on, so there is a Tata Institute notes on Galois cohomology of algebraic groups. There, these kind of computations are explicitly done for classical groups. So typically, one should look up that for examples.
Very nice summary. Good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Manish, you said this odd kx, but if your x is an algebraic group, what was x? Only a variety. What did you write there? I couldn't follow.
I'll go back. No problems. We have a lot of time still left. So this was the tensor example. Yeah, here. So x here is. So this is just a very vaguely written statement. But we are not making this statement in general. I mean, X is an object that we are mostly familiar with. So typically it includes varieties, groups, and algebras and so on. So what I said about variety, that it's a for a variety that automorphisms is an algebraic group, perhaps is not well understood object result. I skipped that part, but for our sake, we look at tensors and algebraic groups and so on. There things are fine.
So your X could be a group, and these would be K-morphisms or something?
Yeah, exactly. And when I take a tensor, then I define what a morphism of a tensor means, particularly isomorphism. So those will be linear maps from V to W. W is another vector space, or V to V, mapping that X to the next one. So V comma X to V comma X prime, or W comma X, whatever. You can define morphisms and so on.
So in case of algebraic groups, there are some conditions which tell you that odd KG is algebraic.
But we will come to that in the next lecture. So there is an exact sequence. So the point is, if I am dealing with semi-simple groups or simple groups, then we have a sequence from. So basically, the center going to the
its main thing is the center. So
so inner automorphisms. So you can. There are automorphisms which are outer automorphisms which correspond to diagram automorphisms. So you have some way of computing automorphisms in general. Actually, one can do some work and compute automorphisms of an algebraic group. So when you say aught of X, I mean automorphisms in that particular category, of course.
Because Hochschild book has some condition on the center, basically.
For what?
For these K-morphisms of an algebraic group to be algebraic.
Yeah, so for me, I am dealing with Chevalier groups, so they correspond to adjoint ones, and there is no center, so that will automatically hold.
Yeah, okay.
You're right, but I'm not dealing with very general situation.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't matter in case of semi-simple, because you don't have, it's the torus should not have, central torus should not have dimension greater than 1 is what.
So that will not happen. Central torus for me, I have thrown out.
So what was the condition, Riddhi? Can you repeat?
You can see Hochschild's book. I think it's called Basic Theory of the Algebra and Algebraic Groups or something. The central torus of an algebraic group should not have dimension more than 1. So in particular, if it's trivial, then it would.
So that would imply that the automorphism group is algebraic.
K-morphisms, it's there in.
It's not necessary, right? It's sufficient, maybe.
Sufficient, not necessary.
Okay. Yeah, because there are examples of these maximal unipotent groups whose automorphism groups turn out to be algebraic, but there we cannot talk about any torus or something.
Yeah, so there is the torus is trivial, right? So then automorphism group is algebraic. So trivial, it's true, but I think for dimension 1 also it is true, because.
But Riddhi, you're right about what you are saying, but I must repeat here that when I defined this notion of cocycle, I use nothing about B being an algebraic group. I said that orally. I repeat again. The only thing we are using about B, that it has the Ks rational points have a Galois action. So as long as it's a group acted upon by gamma by automorphisms. Not automorphisms. There is an act. So it's a torsor really. There is an action of gamma on B. Whatever group you like, it should be a gamma group. Okay. So I will get a set in general. That's all that is. So I can talk of cocycles and so on. Exactly what I have done. So there is no need of working with an algebraic group here, and I'm sorry about misleading. There is no real need of algebraic group.
Very nice talk, Manish. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I hope with all the ambiguities I have managed to throw in, I'm glad if you understood something.
Manish, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm confused when you say this is bijective correspondence here, but then in the end you said subjective map.
No. I said I'm just giving a proof for subjectivity. I have not given the full proof of bijection. I just, because that is really important, given a cocycle, how do I cook up a group out of that? So I personally will need that later. So I wanted to clarify that point. So this is just proof of subjectivity. The
Understood.
forward map, actually the proof is already here, in the sense we defined the forward map, starting with a twisted form. I told you how to get a cocycle. Now I am giving you a reverse map. So one needs to check these maps compose to give you identities on both sides. That
Thank
checking.
you. No, that clarifies. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so some loose points are there. Like I kept saying connected groups, so many times I don't need connectedness, and some proofs are not given. But then we should have something to do on tutorial days, so these can be taken up.
Thanks a lot, Manish.
Wonderful, Shripad.
Yeah. So let me just announce that we are thinking about a tutorial on maybe Wednesday evenings. So I hope that you are all in the mailing list and you have received the link for this meeting through some email. So by the same email, you will receive also information about the possible tutorial. It's most likely to be on Wednesdays at 5:30 p.m. Same meeting link will work. So if you are interested in attending the tutorial, do log in with the same meeting link on this Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. We will go about an hour and we will try to cover some basic points.
5:30 p.m., right?
5:30 p.m. Yeah, I am also putting this deliberately in the recorded version so that it's there for everyone.
So will you send an email to people or?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Another thing was about some change in timings. Are people okay with changing the lecture timing to, say, Saturday evening 4 o'clock? If anyone has any serious problem with that, then we will not change.
Yeah, I would prefer 4 o'clock normally, because it's a weekend and one can get up late and eat late and then sleep and so on. Sleep late. No,